I was a cliche at school, make the bully laugh. I think that was it. And there was a bully, who I will not name, but if he sees this, he'll know who I mean. And years later, I had warm regards from him through the Variety Club. He is now a lord. But I remember him, and I thought if I ever meet him again, I'll go, I remember you. I don't know. You made your mates laugh and everything, but I'd no ambitions to be in the business I've been in for all these years. And I've been dogged by good luck because Blue Eyes got to university and blew it. Now the young ones go into university in a state of debt, which is terrible. And I got into university free. My dad had died. My mum was supporting me, but it didn't cost her to get me into university. I'll make this quick. And I'm BA English, failed of Leeds University because I was chasing girls and in the bar and all sorts. And my first year results showed it. But we did a university show at the Old Empire Theatre in Leeds called a Rag Review. And a guy came up to Leeds to see somebody, not me, saw me telling jokes and offered me work. So if I hadn't been at university, that wouldn't have happened. So it's very strange looking back. I had a half-baked idea of being a journalist, I think. Writing was in my mind. But suddenly I was pitchforked into show business, and I was in shows with titles like Fanny Get Your Fun and We've Nothing On Tonight. Have you got the picture? I was quite happy. We didn't call it a stand-up. I was a stand-up in those days. We called it you were a turn or an act. I became the writer for Danny Rue in nightclubs, and Ronnie Corbett, my old friend, was in the show. I'd written it, and we were both in the show, and David Frost came in. I had submitted one or two bits and pieces for television from my bed sit. Dick Emery, who was a star at the time, I sent some jokes to him before this, I remember, and I was thrilled to bits one night. They did a joke that I'd written for Dick Emery, which is a man sitting watching television, and his wife comes in and says, there's a man here who says, I fought with you in the war. And Hitler walks in. That was the first time I had anything on television, but nothing with continuity until Frosty arrived and invited me and Ronnie Corbett for a drink. And as a result, Ronnie went into the Frost report and I became a Frost writer. And the BBC days, of course, in those days. And yeah, I've just been borne along by events. I've never had a plan. And my wife gets very annoyed when I say I've been dogged by good luck. She says, oh, that's false modesty. No, now and again I've been in the right place at the right time. And if you met David Frost in those days, was that lucky or what, you know? Prior to the Frost report, he did a one-off, a degree of Frost, not a touch of Frost in later years. And I wrote for that. That was the first time I wrote for Frosty, a one-off degree of Frost. And then, of course, the Frost report steamed into action. And a team of writers on that was just amazing. And, of course, you met the whole of Python and the goodies and goodness knows who before they were the Pythons and everything. And veterans like Keith Waterhouse and wonderful writers like that, I couldn't believe what was happening. But having said that, I think if you get a lucky break in life and the door opens, people quite rightly say, justify it, get on with it. You know, once you've had the break, you go through the door, you better get on with it. And I hope I did that anyway. Okay. But people say to me, you know, you wrote for everybody. I say we wrote for everybody. Never wrote alone. Always preferred partnership. Nothing I wrote on my own really registered that well. I needed a partner to spark me off. And when it was sitcoms and whatever, I wasn't good on plot and construction. I was the character and line man. And Graham Chapman, who I worked with, was marvellous on construction. He got a plot in his head immediately once you started talking. Well, then I can tell you. Now I tell you what happens then, you go. And then I would just join in, and I hope I was good on the lines and the characters. But you need the other half of you in writing terms. The one who's contributing the bit that you can't, and you hope you're doing your bit for him or her, you know. Oh, the permutations were endless. I was writing with Dick Vosper, the American, and I've told a story. John Cleese and I sat down to write a sketch once. I wanted to write it in a white heat and then say we'd do better than that, throw it in the bin. He wanted to go back on page one, every word, every syllable, and we just laughed and didn't try it again. There's a sort of indefinable chemistry's got to be right if you're writing with somebody. I was very promiscuous. I can't remember everybody I wrote for in the history of the Frost Report, but boy, you got about a bit. Of course, the class sketch is the classic, Marty Feldman and John Law, the Scotsman. Immodestly, I remember a couple I wrote, which was Ronnie Corbett walking into a park, and it said, there's a notice that says, "Do not walk on the grass." And he does everything but walk. He dances and does cartwheels and the splits and everything, watched by two park keepers who can't book him because they don't know what's happening. And the other one, I think it was Ronnie again, he's climbing over a wall and it says trespassers will be prosecuted. And he jumps down on the other side of the wall and he was in a full courtroom with a jury and a judge. I was quite pleased with those. They were just visuals, you know. I'm mainly a words man, but I like doing visual jokes as well, you know, you just paint the picture of the joke. Frosty was amazing. He came to see me do an old-time music hall at the Players Theatre down at Charing Cross here in London. I was the chairman. And he said, "You can do the warm-ups for my show." I said, "I can't do warm-ups." "Yes, you can." And because of him, I became a warm-up man. I warmed up for him and warmed up for other people as well as writing, which was a great sideline. And David, one day, live show we were doing here, and David the show had started, opening credits, and he was up the road playing a set of tennis with Lou Hode and was going to be back in time for his next appearance, and he didn't make it. And they threw me onto the screen to fill in. "Hello, my name's David Frost." And he didn't make it back in time. And I was a warm-up man, and I was once... He walked onto the set at the very last minute as the music was playing, and one of the crew pulled me away under the camera by my ankles, get me out of shot when David came on. Those are the memories more than the writing, the atmosphere, live television. Frosty loved that. To tell the story of him still in makeup, this is in more recent years, with his Sunday morning show at the BBC, and that was live, and he was in makeup, talking on his mobile. And assistant floor manager, whatever, comes running, David, come on. And he's talking on the phone. Of course, there was a famous diplomat called Boutros Ghali in those days. And Frosty said into his phone, Boutros, always a pleasure. Switched his phone off and walked into the studio. We used to swear he'd make himself last minute just to get the adrenaline going for a live show. Ronnie Barker hated it live. He said it's all done on fear. And Ronnie Corbett loved it, really. Ronnie Corbett was hoping the scenery would fall down or something. And, well, the chemistry between those two, obviously. The two Ronnies before they were the two Ronnies, we crossed over here to ITV and London Weekend and everything, and the two Ronnies and John Cleese were in those shows. And I have a memory, oh boy. The routine then, we would do Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I think was the routine, but the Sunday night was a big variety show. And Peter Sellers was starring this particular Sunday. And Peter arrived, very affable, and we all sat around, the writers, and we'd written stuff for him and the two Ronnies, which he hadn't seen. And he sight-read it brilliantly. So, very smugly, we writers relaxed. We'd done that. And we went off to the bar or to have a cup of tea or something, and we got a message. Peter says, "Have you got anything else?" Now you'd pump it through on a computer or whatever, but in those days, a car went whizzing down to Stonebridge Park, where the offices were, and we had some other stuff we'd written and not used yet. So this was brought up, and Peter again read it brilliantly, sight unseen, just read it. So we're a bit knackered by now. Oh, at least we cracked it. And then we get a message, Peter's gone home. He got in the car and gone home. Panic stations, producer on the phone and everything. He couldn't believe what was happening. He reappears at 2:30 that afternoon saying, what was the stuff we did this morning? The first stuff. Whether he was playing games with the writers or whether he had a basic insecurity or something, but oh boy, those are the memories you had of live television. The atmosphere generated was amazing. That you felt it when you walked in to the building, these studios. You can't define it. You just walked in and there was a buzz in the air. It was a great era there. I like talking about the past. I don't necessarily want to live there, but I look back on this very warmly because you could smell it in the air in the studio. It was just superb. And of course, a lot of it was live, which I loved. Everybody didn't, but Frosty interviewed the great Alfred Hitchcock one night, and this is my most pathetic name drop. And the dressing room's on a sort of mezzanine floor on a balcony, just one up, you know, from... And we would give Frosty bits of paper at the last minute with a topical reference on or a joke or something. And I ran down that mezzanine floor with a bit of paper for Frosty, cannoned into this rather large man who said, hello. And I said, Barry Cryer, Alfred Hitchcock. And I said, sorry about that. Never mind. Great story, that, isn't it? It's the end of my Hitchcock name drop. You never knew who you were going to meet on a Frost show. Oh, it gave you an urgency. You were like journalists. I mean, it was, you became, I still am, you became voracious reader of papers and watcher of the news and listening to the news, which I've never lost. You would do that all day, writing, and knock it together. Last minute, deadline time, within one day. And some people couldn't stand it, they didn't like it, but some of us loved it. And I missed that terribly later when I worked on more relaxed shows that were pre-recorded and, you know, no hurry and everything. No, I loved the vibrancy of that era. That's the memory I've got. The buzz. I appeared briefly in it, last the 1948 show, and the Four Yorkshiremen sketch, Tim Brooke Taylor gets very angry when it's referred to as the Python sketch because it first surfaced in the last the 1948 show. And I played a key role. I played the waiter, telling cameo role. I wasn't asked back when Python did it again. Yeah, that was... and of course, Marty Feldman, who was known to all of us as a writer, he had been on the stage in Variety and Music Hall, but the boys met him and taught us something here and brought him back into performing. And Marty, we all know what happened, you know. He was back performing and became a star name. It was an amazing era. Well, when we moved to ITV, of course, the big change from the BBC was it was live. We were doing live shows on ITV and here and everywhere. And that was a big difference. I mean, the Frost Report had a real atmosphere to it and a drive, but it wasn't live at that moment. So I was one of the people who loved the transition to doing live television, loved it. Ronnie Barker and Ronnie Corbett were going to appear in a This Is Your Life sketch. And I think Ronnie himself thought it was a bit obvious, not that funny. And we were all here, we knew what was going on. And they did the sketch, and it wasn't that funny, it was just there to serve a purpose. And then Eamon Andrews walked on, and it became real. I mean, Ronnie's face was a picture. This sketch, I didn't really reckon it, let's get it over with. And Eamon Andrews walked on. Oh, it was a great moment, that. But we did one live show, and David came out the studio, and we walked up the corridor, and there was a sort of red cord, and the audience were leaving who'd been in, and a man stepped over the red cord, and came up to David Frost and said, Mr. Frost, yes? He's walking along with me, David, and the man said, I've watched you on television, but I always wanted to see you record a show in the studio, which I did tonight. I think you're a complete charlatan. And David put his arm around him and kept him walking and said, you won't believe this, but I value your comments because I get too much sycophancy and people telling me I'm wonderful. And you're giving me an honest opinion of what you think of me. Thank you so much. The man is now buckling under this. He doesn't know what's happening. And David said, I'm serious. I appreciate your honest comment, and shut him out the door. David turned to me and beamed and did a 4-letter word. John Major later on said, being interviewed by David Frost was like sitting in a warm bath, but wait for the cold shower question. Suddenly, in that affable, quiet manner he had with people, there'd be a deadly question, but the tone of voice didn't change. It wasn't, you know, it was just in the course of the conversation, and people would suddenly realise they'd answered that one. Oh, he's a master of it. Studio 5 had its reputation. It was a sort of, I don't know how to put it, it's sort of like a palladium of studios. People who'd never been in here knew about it. I can't think of any one studio that had that sort of reputation. I'd casually mention to somebody, say we're in Studio 5 at Wembley. Oh, somebody would say, and they hadn't even been here. They'd heard about it. Outside, the look of it is different, and reception when you walk in. But as soon as I walked in, that door back there, I could feel something. It's definitely, there's something in the air, in lingering in the air in this big place, particularly this one, Studio 5. Strange, vibrant thing about the shows that were done here. It's because it's such a part of my life, you know. As one of the writers, I was the warm-up man, and you know, it's the way of the world. If we lose this, you'll have lost the tangible symbol of what it was. I don't know whether they're planning to put up some stone or massive plaque or something. They've got to preserve some memory of what went on here. That would be awful if they don't do that. That's got to be preserved some way. I think memory plays tricks. Associated Rediffusion and then the massive gear change into another company. I was a peripheral figure. I was one of the writers. It seemed, I'm sure it wasn't, it seemed effortless as a gear change, that we're moving on, but now going into another idiom, another company. But no, I don't remember dramatic things, even if there were, and I'm sure there were happening behind the scenes, but we weren't privy to all that, the writers. We just went, oh, good, we're still working, you know. So well, of course, I got involved with Eric and Ernie when they left the BBC and went to Thames. And as much talk about, oh, damn, leaving the BBC to go to Thames, BBC bloody ignoring the fact that they poached Kenny Everett from Thames. So, sheer hypocrisy. I'm rather proud of the shows we wrote for Eric and Ernie. The great Eddie Braben was still tied up at the BBC, so he couldn't go. And John Junkin and I had been writing for Eric and Ernie anyway. We were hired to write for Eric and Ernie there. And I'm really, a lot of that Thames stuff, it's somewhere in a vault. It never gets repeated. And we did shows. We did, with Eric and Ernie, we did Jekyll and Hyde, and Eric and Ernie as Disraeli, and Victoria and Albert and all that. And oh, we had some great guests and everything. But I think there was a received impression that, oh, they won't be the same once they've left the BBC. And of course, they were that good. And then Eddie turned up, the man. I used to annoy John Junkin by calling Eddie the A-team. Well, it had happened, Eddie Braben changed them completely. They were a more orthodox double act before. Sid Green and Dick Hills wrote for them on ATV prior to the BBC. And then John Junkin and I. John and I took Eric and Ernie to lunch once in Regent Street because we thought we'd done a Christmas show which we thought wasn't worthy of them. It had been the only time Eric gave us several ideas, and we did it. And it was quite successful. And Eric said, what's all this about? They were intrigued why two writers were taking them to lunch. And I said, well, I didn't think the Christmas show I've just done was worthy of you. John and I wrote. He said, what do you mean? I thought it was really good, said Eric. And I said, yes, but you're Morecambe and Wise. I said, we quite rightly will take the flak because we wrote it. And Ernie, who hadn't been concentrating at all, suddenly looked up and said, do you mean we can be as bad as we like? And I said to Eric, Sid and Dick on ATV made you stars, Eddie Braben made you an institution, and John Junkin and I can make you has-beens. So that was all much mirth at the lunch. But we did amiably resign at that point. But then relented and they asked us back. But yes, that era of Eric and Ernie at Thames was, I thought they did some very good stuff. But there's a lot of shows from that era at Thames have disappeared. Shows that I worked on and wrote. And of course, Kenny Everett. Oh, what an era that was. One of the happiest times of my life working with Everett, because he was the only non-comedian I ever wrote for. He was Kenny Everett. He was just a one-off. And, that was a great time. Well, there was a sketch that never happened with Kenny Everett. Kenny played a character called Sid Snot, who would rant away in front of the camera and throw cigarettes up and catch them in his mouth. We then wrote The Snots, a sitcom. We nearly got down a doors to play the mum at one point, I remember. And it was all set up. And it was an outrageous rock and roll family and everything. And Kenny and I and Ray Cameron, father of Mike McIntyre, my co-writer, we arrived that day at the studio, and the studio was deserted. And we thought, what's going on here? We were just bewildered, and the tea lady arrived, and we had a cup of tea, and we heard that David Mallet, the original producer and director, had burst the budget and actually had left, and we had another director, a good man, but he was apparently being rather emotional in the gents. We thought, what is going on? And we went up to see our boss, Philip Jones. Everett's eyes went very steely. He said, we're going to see Philip. And we went up to see our boss because the sketch they'd been told we're not filming this sketch. This sketch will not be done. So we walk in and the director's slumped in the corner like that. You're the boss, Philip. I'm Kenny Everett. No, I'm Kenny Everett, pointing at the director but looking at the boss saying, I can't work with this man. And Philip, the most amiable, said, oh, no, come on, I booked a table for lunch. And Everett said, oh, what a shame. Ray, and I was always bar, because that's where he usually found me, probably. Oh, bar, and Ray and I are going for lunch. And we walked out. And then I got a phone call from Jim Moyer, a neighbour of mine to this day, at the BBC. How are you getting on with the Everett show? I said, I'm only a writer, Jim. Now, come on. How's it going? Could be better, I said. And that was it. We were invited for a drink with Jim the next week at the BBC. Worked our time out on that particular series and decamped to the BBC. Stirring times. Well, it was continuing with Everett. And but then it's a different idiom, you know. They tried to turn Ev into a BBC comedian. At Thames, we just recorded all day. No audience. And it was the only show I ever worked on where nobody said quiet. Nobody said quiet, you just did it. And if you heard any laughing, it was the crew. We never asked them to laugh. That'd be insulting, but they loved it. They fought to get on it. But the BBC, it was rehearsal all week, audience coming in on Friday night. Very different. And Everett used to say, oh, they'll be in tonight. He became brilliant with the studio audience in the finish. And we would have a giant Everett behind the audience who'd reach down and pick up a man from the audience and talk to him. We did all that sort of stuff, but there was something missing. There again, it's a question of atmosphere. The Thames shows had atmosphere because it was people having fun in a studio all day long. And we were the modest version of Morecambe Wise, because Morecambe Wise had the most amazing guests. But all the rockers and the rock bands and singing stars wanted to be on with Everett. They wanted to come on and be insulted by Everett. They loved it. The Rod Stewarts and Cliff Richard did it several times, Cliff, and Brian Ferry, I remember, Elton John. They all wanted to be on with Everett because they reckoned him. Because of his radio reputation, he was a superb radio performer and DJ. And I think that was the reason. So that was another great atmosphere, the guests you had. I haven't written for a show for years. My life went full circle. It's all performing now and gigging and everything. I can't believe it. I do gigs with a friend of mine called Ronnie Golden, who's a great rock and roller. And we do the Edinburgh Fringe every year, and we do gigs. And we write all the songs, no covers. And it's rock and roll and gospel and blues and jokes. So I love that. And of course, there's a radio show, Sorry I Haven't a Clue. And I do another stage show with Colin Sell, the pianist, on that. So we're still gigging. I love it. I think maybe by nature, I was always more of a performer than a writer, I think, in a way. And I think as a performer, that's why I like writing in partnership with somebody. I didn't feel I had an innate talent to write on my own, but I could be a good partner. Never thought about this. This is turning into on the psychiatrist's chair, isn't it? Don't analyse comedy. Yeah. Analysing comedy is like dissecting a frog. Nobody laughs and the frog dies. I wouldn't have missed it for the world. And even during the writing period, I was doing stuff, you know, I was doing a show called Joker's Wild, and I say, due to Frosty, I was doing warm-ups all over the place. Some of the, warming up Victor Borge, the great man, and, in those days, you just got the phone call. One-off special on the weekend, down at Waterloo, not here. Victor Borge, and I put the phone down, I thought, are you mad? Going on talking before this great man comes on. So now you get it through on your laptop or whatever. I rang up and said, could you send me Victor Borge's CV? And I got it. And I went on that night to the warm-up, and I just told them about Victor Borge, what this man has done. And I got the signal. The reason we're here tonight, Mr. Victor Borge. And he walked on, gave me a nice nod, and the show started. Hold it. There's a breakdown camera quite early on or something. He's not very amused, so he walks off. Get on, you're being paid. I was sent on again. We start the show. I said, once more, the reason we're all here tonight, Mr. Victor Borge. You couldn't make this up. A third time there's a hold-up. Now he is not amused. And he walks off, and he's leaning against the wall looking, I'm on again. And yet again I get the signal. And I say, yet again the reason we're here tonight, Mr. Victor Borge. And I deferred to him when he walked on, and he got hold of my arm in a vice, and he pulled me into his spotlight, and he said, now you know the reason I'm here tonight, to fill in the gaps between Barry Cryer. Isn't that lovely from a star? Isn't that lovely? Fabulous.